And this is a condition that we're manufacturing by, making it so that the minimum wage is $10 less than a living wage.
Welcome back to Closer Look across the Village Media Network and wherever you get your favorite podcast. Zach is here. Mr. Friscalanti is here. I'm Scott Sexsmith, fresh out of the research vault. You ready for this?
Yes.
Mel B was Scary Spice.
Mm-hmm.
Melanie C was Sporty Spice. Emma Bunton was Baby Spice. Jerry Hollowell, Ginger Spice. And, of course, we know Victoria Beckham. Posh.
Are they was or is? They're probably still.
Well, I think they
still go by it.
You're always the Beatles, right?
Yeah.
The Stones.
In all seriousness, as I was researching the Spice Girls, because it was mentioned by Doug Ford's business minister in justifying the FOI changes,
right.
And I kind of took a little bit of a dig at him in my column writing about it. But just because I was trying to figure out if I had the song title right, and because I remember the song title.
Yeah.
They were huge. They were huge.
Oh
they were massive.
Yeah.
And what they did for the girl power and the influence they had on so many musicians to come, it was like, because there were so many, quote unquote boy bands, but there wasn't anything like the Spice Girls.
There was not.
Massive cultural, and I guess I didn't pay attention at the time, or I wasn't not much into music anyway. So I think that's part of what it is. They were huge. And then there was rumors of a reunion, Scott.
There was.
So
yes.
Anyways, the invitation's open if any of the Spice Girls want to come on and talk, A, about a potential reunion.
Yes.
And B, about what they think of the Ford government's FOI changes. I'm in.
I'm sure they
have deep thoughts.
They're dying to weigh in on that.
But they, you know what? They might be all for democratic transparency. They strike me as, the girl power and power to the people.
Damn right.
I don't know.
Love that. Power to the people. Okay, speaking of people and requiring a living wage to get by, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. There's a new 35-cent raise coming to Ontario's minimum wage. That's going to kick in October the 1st. Mm-hmm. That will now take minimum wage to $17.95 an hour.
Yes.
But if you do the math on that, let's say that you work 40 hours a week at $17.95, you're still earning less than $38,000 a year. Mm-hmm. And I think the poverty line in Ontario is $27,000 or just over $27,000.
Yes.
So that gap is not.
And the reality is, on that wage, how do you rent a place in any big city or any city in Ontario? It's very good. And this is the gap. And so Craig is from the Ontario Living Wage Network, which kind of calculates, they do. They calculate what an actual living wage is in the communities across Ontario and encourage employees to get on board paying workers. And they have hundreds of employers that are on there. So we're going to chat with him about the minimum wage jump, but also how we fill that gap between what minimum wage actually is and what living wage is.
A 35-cent raise is coming to Ontario's minimum wage this fall. On paper, that's a boost tied to inflation, the kind of steady, predictable increase governments like to point to. But here's the reality. Even with that bump, full-time minimum wage workers in Toronto are still about $9 an hour short of what it actually costs to live. So this isn't really about a raise. It's about a gap that doesn't seem to be closing. Craig Pickthorne is with the Ontario Living Wage Network, and he joins us now to talk about what that gap looks like and why it's still there. Craig joins us tonight from Ottawa. Craig, welcome to Closer Look. We appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for having me. This is great.
Craig, in real terms, what does that roughly $9 gap between minimum wage and a living wage actually mean in someone's day-to-day life?
Well, this is a pretty well-studied phenomena. People have to hold down multiple jobs. They might have to enter the gig economy. Other household members might have to also work where they wouldn't have before. And you probably will have to, at one point, make a decision about what you're going to cut and what you're going to go into arrears on month to month. So that's the reality that we know about very well. When you just can't, if you work full time, you should be able to make ends meet. You should be able to pay your bills. But we know that's not the case anywhere in the province if you're working a full-time minimum wage job, even after the increase on October 1st.
Mm-hmm. I think there's about 700,000 people in the province right now earning minimum wage. Are there numbers or research you guys have done on how many of those are actually working more than 40 hours that are juggling two minimum wage jobs, for example?
I bet there is, because there's places of research and policy that dive into this much better than we can. But places like the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, for example, will have some most excellent research on that.
Craig, you've said people are choosing which bills to fall behind on. What are you hearing from workers about the kinds of decisions that they're being forced to make?
Well, when you look at the spike in costs of fuel and in food especially, and other things like that, people are going to have to start to tighten, because there's something that, there's one thing that you can't, jostle around, which is shelter costs. You'll just, you run into trouble there, obviously. So people have to, that's the baseline, and then they have to make adjustments in other areas of the wallet, right? This is a known thing. Mm-hmm. And this is a condition that we're manufacturing by, making it so that the minimum wage is $10 less than a living wage in the Toronto area, for example, which is the highest living wage in the province.
Part of the balancing act we hear here, whenever I read these stories, whenever it's once a year, they change the rate based on inflation. You hear from small business owners, for example, say, oh man, that's going to be even harder on my bottom line. My margins are going to be more difficult. How do you respond to that, Craig? Because that's part of the tug of war here, right?
Sure. And, it's not like we're not sympathetic to small business owners and people that make our communities a much nicer place to live. But we do have, in our ranks of certified living wage employers, many small businesses as well. We have businesses and organizations of all sizes. They anticipate the rise in the living wage every year, and they make plans for it, and they remain certified with us, even through very hard times, in better times. Through it all, they've remained certified. There's over 600 certified living wage employers in Ontario, and we add more all the time. And they report to us, well, here's one thing that I noticed when I pay a living wage. I get much better recruits that will come through after we put out a call for a position. We have lower training costs because we have lower turnover. And the number one thing actually that we're surprised recently, we ask our employers, what's the number one reason that you became certified and remain certified? They used to say things like the practical things like, well, lower turnover. But now they're starting to say that it's the number one way in which we can communicate our values to the wider public. And values is a position that you have to think about now as a business. And people are looking to do business, or consumers are looking to purchase from a business they can trust is not holding people in working poverty. Mm-hmm. So that's, I think, to answer your question in a very long-winded way, employers make the best recruiters. They make the best arguments about why one would want to pay a living wage. And I'll just end it with saying, in 2018, the living or minimum wage went up from $11 and change to $14, the largest increase we have ever seen. The predictions were very dire that there'd be a complete decimation of the economy and the job market would bottom out and jobs would disappear. None of that really happened. In the very next year, in 2019, we saw an increase in employment in Ontario. So we just ran the largest experiment there ever was, and none of those predictions came true. That's not how I would make the case to an employer, but just for our discussion's sake, that's a fact that you can't really argue.
Those are all great points. I appreciate it. We should have asked this off the top. Just tell our listeners who aren't aware, what is the Ontario Living Wage Network? What do you guys do?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we do two things primarily. We calculate the local living wage rates for 10 regions in Ontario, covers the whole province. And then, so we do that every year. We release the new updated rates in November. The second thing we do is we certify and recognize and list publicly employers who enter into a legal agreement with us to pay at least a living wage to all their full-time, part-time, and contract employees. And they do so, they have to renew that every year. They have to follow any increases to the living wage rates where they're doing business. And that's the two main things that we do.
Can you give us an example of like a business that maybe at first was like hesitant to join up with this and sign on, but they're so happy that they did?
Some larger organizations will enter our program, but it's a tiered entry, so that especially when you have like service contracts with, say, cleaners or security guards that come up for renewal, you can't just snap your fingers and, change the pay structure. So like a larger municipality, like say St. Catharines, Ontario, entered into a scheme like that where they, they're when the service contracts are up, they're going to put in a provision for a living wage, as an example. Things like that. There's other businesses that have come to us and said, we're interested in the living wage certification program. We're not there yet, but we're going to, make a plan in a couple of years. We're going to be at where we think the living wage will be. And that's not too uncommon as well. We make our calculations are totally public. People are welcome to refer to OntarioLivingWage.ca to see what the living wage rates are and how we get them. And, if they want to find a certified employer in their area.
Craig, you've calculated different living wages across Ontario. You mentioned, I think, 10 different places, Ottawa, Hamilton, London. What's driving those differences, and are any regions actually getting closer to affordability?
Sure. Well, in the Southwest, where Windsor is, that's one of the more affordable places, as is London at $21.05. So what happens is always the biggest factor that goes into a living wage calculation is shelter costs, rent, and rental insurance, and some hydro. But that's kind of been increasing across the province, but less so in some of those locations like London and Windsor. And then we look at Toronto at $27.20, is of course because of the rise in rents there as well.
Yeah.
And sorry, what was the lowest one? Toronto's the highest. What was the lowest?
London at $21.05.
So they're actually they're catching up. They're catching up a little bit. If at $18 is the minimum wage, that's impressive.
And another factor that goes in is if a city or location has great transit, then when we do our calculation on our hypothetical family, we have 3 family types actually that we then average in. When our hypothetical family of 4 with 2 small kids doesn't need to have 2 cars because the city or whatever has a good transit system, that can also help to keep the living wage increases year to year under control. So it really shows you the power of public services, the power of shared, services that you can have at your disposal to keep things affordable.
Absolutely. I remember when I lived in Toronto, all the people who lived there are going to laugh at me, but that was the thing. You didn't have a car. You didn't need a car. I mean, it was great. You could jump on any bus, subway, streetcar. Craig, we keep hearing about the economy and how we're facing so many headwinds. It's teetering. We're in for some rough months ahead is what we keep hearing. How much does that concern you, and how does that impact employers who do some say, you know what, maybe we can't do this now and pay a living wage?
Yep. To be honest, we look at the economic forecast just like anybody else in the province and go, okay, so let's see what happens here. Out of our control, obviously. We have experienced, slowdowns in the past, and you get obviously a little more attrition than you normally get. Like, sadly, there's employers that reach out to us and say, look, I have to close down, so I'm not going to be able to renew. Obviously, I'm not going to be in business anymore. So it's really sad when you see that happening. But, there are employers that are able to weather that. And so we continue to certify. And, during the last economic slowdown, we were able to pause our collection of fees and things like that to make sure that we're able to keep certifying. Keep our doors open. There's a staff of 2, actually. That's it, that runs this whole show, myself included, and somebody else in Kitchener. So we make provisions to make sure that we can continue to certify people and businesses, even if there's an economic downturn.
All right, good stuff. Craig, before we let you go tonight, anything that we didn't cover that perhaps we should have?
Sure. I just wanted to explain. Some people may be curious, how do we calculate our living wages?
Sure.
We look at all the expenses that a worker would have to cover. And we do so for 3 different family types: a family of 4, a single adult with 1 small child, and a single adult living alone. And it's, the big ones are rent, transportation, childcare, and food. We also look at like high-speed internet access and a modest vacation. And so when we boil all that down, add in any government taxes or transfers of benefits, what you get is a living wage like an hourly wage that you have to earn in order to make ends meet where you live. And the whole idea is, I mean, if you work full time, you should be able to exist. You should be able to live and pay your bills. That's what it's all about.
Very well said. There's Craig Pickthorne, the Director of Communications at the Ontario Living Wage Network, joining us tonight from Ottawa. Thanks for this, Craig. Enjoy your long weekend.
Thank you. You too, Bryce.
That's amazing. 700,000 people in the province working for minimum wage. And the misconception is that you hear minimum wage and you automatically think teenagers, right?
Yes, yeah.
Like part-time jobs.
Yeah.
Not the case.
No, not at all. It's actually a small percentage that are teenagers. And as Craig said, you know, they're working their 40 hours, but they're probably they're often working two jobs. And the gig economy is huge now too. What he said, right? They're Uber drivers. They're doing all kinds of things to try to make ends meet. Like he said, you can check out more on their website, the Ontario Living Network, Living Wage Network.
All right, good stuff. That's it for us tonight. Closer look at villagemedia.ca. That is our email address. Sign up. Check us out online. You can find back episodes at closerlookpodcast.ca. For Zach Trunzo, executive producer of this evening's program, and Michael Friscoletti, our editor-in-chief here at Village Media, I'm Scott Sexsmith. Thanks for your time. Have a great night. We'll see you tomorrow at 7 right here on Closer Look.
Briscoe and Scott's wardrobe provided in part by Moore's Clothing for Men.